Our next conversation takes on the theme of this year's summit, building the innovation mindset, exploring the defining characteristics of innovative teams, cultures, and organizations. Our moderator of this leadership discussion is Angela Ichwan, Senior Director, Technical Lead of the Annex, the specialty business unit of Ardent Mills. In this role, Angela is responsible for the company's innovation pipeline, spanning portfolio expansion to high growth and high value products and commercialization. Prior to Ardent Mills, Angela led diverse cross-functional teams at Pepperidge Farms, Kellogg Company, and HJ in developing products from concept to commercialization in both domestic and international markets. Angela is passionate about aligning colleagues and companies to ensure that strategic objectives are accomplished with exemplary results. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Ichwan.
Thank you, Jordan. That was a lovely introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. And I'm hoping that we can make you awake after the food coma, so that will be our challenge. So I want to thank you, CSU, for giving me the opportunity to moderate the innovation panel. It's a subject I'm really passionate about. We have the pleasure of having two distinguished guest speakers who had broad experience from food, chemical, agriculture, private equity, startup experiences to talk to us and share their wisdom and insight. So I'm delighted to welcome Jodi Benson, Chief Innovation Technology and Quality Officer from General Mills. And Jodi? And Florian Schattenmann, Chief Technology Officer and Vice President, Innovation and Research Development from Cargill.
You nailed it.
You know?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. In her role, Jodi is responsible for the invention and commercialization of new food products and technologies, which provide increasingly higher levels of well-being, ease, and joy to meet consumers' evolving food values. Most recently, she served as leaders for General Mills' integrated innovation, technology, and quality centers of excellence, focused on broad set of capabilities most critical for the company's ongoing success, such as food safety, nutrition, scientific and regulatory affairs, as well as product design and innovation. It is the mission of this team to transform possibilities into realities. And Florian, in his role, oversees a global team that is driven by the vision of relentless creating value for Cargill and its customers via research, application, and product development. Prior to joining Cargill in 2018, Florian spent 8 years at Dow Chemical Company, where he led innovations across a diverse set of specialty businesses leveraging unique chemistries and advanced technology to drive market-focused product development. Florian is a certified Six Sigma Master Black Belt. Don't mess with him. Holds 7 US patents and has numerous publications. So welcome, Jodi and Florian. And I want to applaud CSU to put together a really thought-provoking and interesting discussion around our food system. So let me move this way. Okay. So yesterday we heard from our keynote speaker, Saswati Bora, about global forces that is affecting our food system. And this morning, we have been listening about how we engage, how we bring everyone to the table, how we can provide solution with advanced technology, and also diversity of solution. So I think that's a really key message that we heard today, There's no one solution that will solve the issue, so we have to be willing to be uncomfortable with the balance of solution, which may be disagreeable to your view, or you think it's not the right way. So with that, we will spend this session discussing how we all can be part of building innovation mindset. To kick off our discussion, I would like to ask Jodi and Florian to introduce themselves and share an insight or story about what excites or inspires you about innovation and why.
So I'm up first?
Sure.
How's that? Is it working? Okay. So hi, Jodi Benson. I work for General Mills, and I've been there 29 years, so a little bit of background. And that sounds like an awfully long time, but I need to say that each day and each month and each year has been a real learning journey for me personally. And so as long as that sounds, the macro forces that you mentioned from talking earlier have really continued to shift our industry. And because General Mills is a very large company, we're about $16 to $17 billion in sales, and have been around for 153 years. I have the fortunate opportunity to work across a diversity of technologies and products and brands and geographies. I've worked across the globe and both lived, Minneapolis is our home base, so lived in Minneapolis for a majority of my career, but also in France, and I've spent time in Shanghai and Mumbai, in Sao Paulo, so a global kind of footprint in terms of my personal career, along with all that learning in those spaces. And so, so maybe just a second on General Mills, because a lot of times when I go out and talk to people, they don't know kind of General Mills history. So like I mentioned, 153 years. We are category creators, so granola bars and fruit snacks and children's cereal are just some of the history of what General Mills has created, along with things like the black box. So if you hear about the black box on airplanes, we have a history in strong technology and processing equipment, so have quite a bit of work in that space in our history, and it's that combination that we put together today. So, so it's a little bit about me, a little bit about the company, and then the last ask was maybe something that's inspiring me. And as I thought about that, I thought you're probably all expecting it to be, you know, the iPhone 6000 or whatever is the next generation. But actually, what I am getting inspired about today is more about how General Mills is making a commitment to regenerative ag. And so I thought, gosh, you guys, if anybody, know a lot about that and know a lot about how that might work going forward. And we are very excited about it from the perspective that it is a place where our scale adds value. A lot of times we think about how the scale of a large company can be cumbersome or could slow you down. In the spaces of transformation, the scale of General Mills is what it will take, along with great partners like Cargill, to actually transform an industry. And this is just a small little sound by one that a team recently updated me on, and I thought it was an interesting nugget. So we buy a lot of oats. We sell 7 million boxes of Cheerios every single week, and all of those are just packed full of oat goodness. And with that, we've been looking at a commitment of 1 million acres of regenerative ag by 2030. That's our commitment that we're working on. And as we're working on that, we're looking at new practices and new ways to help with biodiversity, to help with economic resiliency and soil health. And one of the experiments that we just recently ran was we did intercropping. I'm sure, show of hands, do you guys know intercropping? It's kind of standard fare for everybody. So in this case, we mixed oats and peas together and did intercropping. And what we saw was a 40% increase in the yield. And it was just a small experiment, and it particularly fits to the type of ingredient, the oats, that we were interested in. But we're super excited about the data that we're collecting, because we believe that regenerative ag is going to require more of a knowledge-centric approach to agriculture. We've had a lot of kind of people who have been experts about the inputs, but as we see people shifting to the knowledge side of things, data is going to be king. And so running these experiments and figuring out for your exact plot of land, for your exact crop, how can you increase your yield, or more importantly, increase your profit, is really where we see the future going. And now for the technology twist. So we did the intercropping with the oats and the peas. Kind of that's standard. You guys aren't surprised by that. But the thing that was transformative for us is that we launched gluten-free Cheerios maybe now 5 or 6 years ago, and with that developed a patented technology about how we separate any stray wheat or barley from our oats to prevent the gluten from being interacting. And the magic on the intercropping is not just can you plant it and get a better yield, it's how can you actually go downstream, mill it, separate it, and do that efficiently. And by combining some of our expertise on what we developed for gluten-free, we believe that in combination with these new practices or old practices made new could create a new way to innovate for the future as we look at how could we make that economically viable to help us advance that effort. So that's where we're learning. It's early days. We'd be excited to learn with you if that sparks any insight for you, but that's just one small place that I'm getting excited about for the future.
Great. I'm Florian Schattenmann. Instead of 29 years, I'm 1 year with Cargill, and I come from entirely different industries, and it's actually a really interesting perspective. I grew up in Munich, in Bavaria, and this value proposition of mountain, sunshine, and beer really resonates here, so that's fantastic. You know, did my undergrad degree still in Germany, then went for grad school to the US and ultimately met my wife there and so stayed in the US. So this is actually my 6th company. So I worked for Colgate-Palmolive, more the B2C area, then for a long time with GE, and then in a startup. And I think that is a really, really interesting experience, and honestly what we're experiencing here in the ag sector is an enormous amount of influx of startup companies. We'll probably hopefully get to talk a little bit about that because that is a really disruptive force right now. Ended up then at Dow Chemical, and you covered a lot of different market, automotive and building construction and food and pharma and so on. And so it is a really good way for me to translate some of the learnings from other industries into the ag industry. Talking about Cargill is probably known to most of you. It is a $115 billion family business. It is a $115 billion revenue family business. And it is founded, I guess, one year before. It's a 154-year-old young company, if you want. And we do everything from the farmer to the fork, and from moving commodities around to animal feed, a huge food ingredient business, and so on. So a really exciting time. In terms of what gets me excited, so when the executive recruiter reached out for Cargill, I hadn't really paid that much attention to the ag and food space. And so I wasn't that interested in the beginning, went back and forth and so on. And so I started to do my due diligence. And I found that this industry, which I thought was kind of sort of, huge, but below the radar and somewhat sleepy, had become just red hot. And there's, and it really hit me maybe in May this year. I was on stage in a similar panel with the Economic Forum of the Americas. And on the stage were 4 people: the founder and CEO of Beyond Meat, the agricultural director of Microsoft, big tech, the CEO of Bridge Hub, which connects the thousands of startups with companies like ours. And I was actually the one also new to the industry, but I was the one kind of representing old ag, right? So it was just it just hit me that this is the space we're in. It is super disruptive. It's actually super exciting. And if you look at some of the problems that mankind face in terms of how to feed 10 billion people by 2050 and so on, it's us. It's that community. And so that is really what excites me. I can give you a lot of different technology stories, and maybe we squeeze one in over time, but that's kind of where I'm coming from.
Perfect. That's great. So this is really interesting because I think both of you, Florian, coming from totally different industry, and Jodi, you've been in the industry for a long time. So this is an appropriate question: is that in the past 5-10 years, right, we see large companies being disrupted by startups, as you mentioned, and in the ways that I don't think they expected, or maybe they see it but didn't act on it. Airbnb is an example, and like the Greek yogurt, Chobani, creating a new category in the yogurt business, disrupting the business, and the phenomenon of impossible foods, Beyond Meat, and impossible foods is another element of impossible foods breakthrough is the acceptance of GM ingredients, right? So anyway, I'm on to stay in track here. The question is why do the incumbents leaders in the space fail to craft their own disruptions?
Well, I can get started here. It's unless there is some sort of threat, there's not a lot of incentive to disrupt yourself. So in a way, if you're the leader, and we happen to be the leader in what we do, it's why am I disrupting myself? Typically, only there's more downside than upside typically to activities like this until somebody else comes there and disrupts you, and that's kind of what's happening. And the way we view this is now we're in a stage where we have to either disrupt or we get disrupted. And that's actually not a bad place to be. And I look back into other industries. If you think about the automotive industries, just 15, 20 years ago, it was, R&D funding was way down, very little product development, a lot of it was cost out, just maybe sort of supply chain optimization. So it is one of the most, it's probably the industry right now that spends the most on new product development and R&D, because it has to. It was the companies like Elon Musk's, the electrical vehicle. It was just other forms of transportation. This entire idea of interconnectedness, digitalization, the expectations that customers have. So it's actually in a way it's a good thing. And I think it's you have to understand who you are. We still are the big guys in the supply chain where we play. We have that fundamental competitive advantage, but now we have to just get more innovative, try different things, get into different businesses, try different business models. And I think that's, in a way, that's a really exciting thing, because I still do believe that competition, these kind of things, will ultimately help us solve some of those problems that I just mentioned before.
And Jodi?
I guess the thing that I think about is when I think about those disruptions, I think first about the consumer and how has the consumer value proposition changed. And so for me, I look at every single one of those and say kind of what the consumer needs and expect changed. And there was a time where I would say for the food industry where big kind of beat small. And so imagine the days where it was difficult to get cut onto the shelf and become, serving consumers. And so we had this combination of the big guys owning kind of the share of shelf and meeting consumers' needs. Well then, over time, consumers' needs changed. They were going much more to what I would call almost the undoing of food, going to more simplicity. And so we went to consumers wanting kind of more simple products. And then we also had at the same time an industry shift where there was a lot of embracing by retailers of smaller companies and smaller brands. And so when you put those two things together, I think, to Florian's point, when you're a big guy and you're kind of caught in a different mindset and system, it took us a little bit of time to kind of correct, to understand where are consumers going, and then also to understand how to compete in the new world. In the new world where it's an omni-channel world, where it's any kind of, it doesn't necessarily mean it's just at the kind of big box grocery store, but it's maybe online or it's away from home. There's lots of different venues where people are getting their food. And so I think that is the other piece. And so what I would say now is my mindset has shifted, that it's no longer about the big beating the small. It's much more about the speed beating the slow. And so for me, I think much more about learning velocity. If I went back 10 years ago, we were probably talking about the scale of our launches and how big could they be and how could we deliver mass solutions for everyone. Today, I think much more about how quickly can we learn, what's our learning cycle, and how are we listening to what consumers are wanting now. So I think for us, the disruption is a wake-up call, and those competitive threats helped us to kind of see that next generation and to build new skills and capability that now I would say with learning velocity and our scale, we are kind of bringing up to speed some of the growth. If you look at the latest IRI report, it tracks the biggest, all of the new product launches, and it looks at what percentage are coming from small, medium, and big companies. And if you went back to like 2012, big companies had 50% of the new items that were being launched, and small companies had significantly less, medium was bigger. We took a dip in the last 5 years as that transition and that kind of disruption occurred. But if you look at this year's, we're back to where we were in 2012. And I think a lot of that is companies like ours, we're big, but we're working differently than we had in the past.
That's great. So commenting about how disruptors or in competition and also the emergence of the small companies affecting how you do business, can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of what changed in terms of organizational structure, or is the process changed in terms of innovation process within your company from the supplier perspective and from the manufacturer's perspective?
So I'll go quickly. First, just I would say, yes, it's definitely changed. A lot of times I'm on the stage talking about innovating our innovation. So we had to take a big look at kind of our cycle times and how we were gathering consumer information. So what I would say is if we looked at 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, we were doing more surveys, asking consumers, what do you think about this? What do you do today? What do you purchase? And a lot of saying, not doing. Today, we're looking much more at the behaviors of what do they actually do. It's a much better predictor. And so we've shifted kind of how we learn from consumers. And then I would say that, again, that learning velocity, today, we are able to get from an idea to the first dollar sale in under 20 days. We are doing it very small, very quickly. If you look back 5 years ago, a typical line extension in a food company would have been, a year. And now we're doing it in weeks, days, and much quicker, and we're doing it both physically and digitally. So I'd say the way of innovating and the way teams are working is really changed.
Yeah, for us as a supplier, one thing that's really exciting is now to work with CPG companies like General Mills in different ways, right? How do we, in the past it was much more serial. There was maybe, some new products and ideas, concepts, it took a while and so on. And then they would come to an ingredient supplier like us and we would engage us, we would need this, and can you give a texturizers like that with those kind of properties. Now I think we see a lot more that we, demand science already tells us where we roughly have to play. We're gonna sit there with the CPG companies in combined teams that do co-creation. So there's sort of a good idea where we want to play. Let's not get caught up with sticky notes in a conference room forever. Let's get in the lab. Let's try some stuff and fail fast, right? I think these types of ways to work together are really changing. And I lived in a startup. It's a startup with 22 global employees. And what is the advantage of a startup? A startup has typically, hopefully, a good concept, a good idea, a good technology, and it has focus. But it lacks capabilities, access to customers, markets, often global footprint and those kind of things. If we can get some of that focus, some of that speed, just what Jodi mentioned, combined with these much more leading capabilities, better footprint and so on, then you can actually win in this space much quicker. And I think we're really making strides. I think it's very exciting. And as I said before, a lot of these startups and this disruptive market has put us a little bit on notice. Nothing wrong with that. Now it's for us to take advantage of that.
So you mentioned it looks like in the past, yesterday and today, I think we talk about how we need to connect each of the players, the stakeholders in the value chains much more closer. And it looks like from the Cargill and General Mills, this is really a success story that you can actually innovate faster by connecting and collaborating, co-creating. So a lot of our audience here are also farmers and the players and stakeholders in the front end of the supply chain on the value chain. Do you have any kind of suggestions or call even how they can play in terms of making that connection even closer and further along helping you guys innovate and successful in the market?
I mean, clearly we are all part of one ecosystem here in the ag and food space that has to work closely together. If we work on let's say a new canola with low saturated fat, and single unsaturated, in really trying to optimize certain properties, it is ultimately the farmers and growers who will make it happen. Let's be very clear. And so how do we work together? The openness to connect, the onus sits to some degree on us to get farmers involved early, to, show them along, and I think those types of collaboration will happen more and more. I think a lot of I think we will see a lot more collaboration, sometimes not even necessarily always long-term. They could be very project-based or very specific, opportunity-based, but I think we will see a lot more kind of collaboration activities across the value chain.
Yeah, and I guess what I would say is we're maybe a little bit smaller in that scale because it's further up the chain for us, but I would say that our commitment on soil health has resulted in us actually creating and partnering with a group of people who are consulting at the grower level. So we've done in the last year 1,000 farm visits where we are going to the farm, we are working with the local farmers in that community, and we are working together to identify a program. Do we want to look at, it could be literally what are they planting or what phenotype data are they gathering, or it could be on soil health. How could we use them as a farm that would help us gather the data we need to say, hey, can we really sequester more carbon or not? How is kind of the moisture resiliency of the soil being disrupted by either the way we're tilling or the way that we're doing cover cropping? All of that kind of relationship building is happening farmer to farmer. And so we have right now 90 experiments that we have going on directly with farmers where they're teaching us and helping us to understand so that ultimately we can improve our education that we give back out to a broader group. So it's kind of a cycle, I guess, a virtuous cycle of help us learn locally, partner together, and then have that cycle repeat and develop the ecosystem that Florian was talking about.
Excellent. So I'm going to shift gear slightly here and discuss about people and talent within your organization. As we learn actually the way we communicate from Gen Xers, millennials, on Gen Zs or boomers, we communicate differently or we get information differently. And therefore I think it's also affecting how they receive information as well and how they learn. So in terms of these generational differences in the workforce, how you as a leader nurture this innovation mindset when you have a wide diversity of generational differences in terms of how to innovate, how they live their life. There's a lot of changes happening now that really makes a big difference.
Yeah. Well, I'll go with one kind of thing that we've done that maybe is a way of kind of bridging the gap. So we used to have kind of a traditional structure, and so at one point somebody said to me, if 200 years ago somebody left here, or maybe let's say 100 years ago, and saw kind of how business was structured, and then came back 100 years later, the org chart would just be different names, but it would look exactly the same boxes, the same exact structure. And I thought, yeah, that's kind of true. But I can tell you today, if you asked our company to put kind of how does the org structure look, would it look exactly the same with the boxes? It might, but it's not how it works. So I would say the boxes and the lines on the page are not reflective of how people are working. What I see with the kind of current generation of workforce is that we have more of a integrated system. We have the boxes and the lines on the paper, and then we have the network of how work really happens. And so today I talk a lot less about titles and boxes and roles, and I'm much more about skills and swarming. So I'm much more interested in, here's the problem to be solved, the skills that we need, and who wants to work on it. So at General Mills and ITQ, that's Innovation, Technology, and Quality, we have a program that is called the Internal Marketplace. So people can opt in to the places they want to work where they have passion and energy. And that's for any generation. You can be somebody senior in the organization, you can be someone junior, but it's really trying to take your skills and your passion and match that with the job to be done. And so while we still have the structures on the page to help people with administering, you know, kind of the standard order of protocols of, you know, kind of career management and things like that, but the day-to-day, how do you work, who do you partner with, what are you working on, that's much more based on this fluid system of swarming to the work.
I think those are some great points, and I would say there's two areas that you have to focus on, and one of them is this culture that allows really diversity of thinking and inclusion in it. And the inclusion is probably even more important than the diversity part. So really different viewpoints are allowed. There are no bad ideas. And actually you put teams together that are diverse, I think is very important. But the number one thing I found, and it helps with all of this, is purpose. And it turns out that this is actually cutting a lot of cross generations and so on. If you give people some exciting purpose of why we're doing something, and most of our, pretty much all of our R&D efforts, projects have a side effect that the sustainability footprint is somehow better or improved compared to of any product that it replaces. If you find that purpose and bring people together, I think that is absolutely huge. And I want to come back to the diversity part one more time, because I think everybody has blind spots. Everybody somehow grows up in a certain way. I'm German, I grew up in a very homogeneous society and so on. And that's totally okay. The key is that you know about it and that you have some awareness around it and that there's a filter, and then you put that into account. Then you're good to go. And I think creating these atmospheres, make it in an informal way, you know, making sure as a leader in the room that the voice that hasn't been heard for a while, just you have to say, hey, Joe, why, or, you know, hi, Mary, or, you know, what is your point on this one? And so once you do that, you actually get a lot more involvement and people start to appreciate that.
So I want to follow up on the people kind of factors here and the conversation around the diversity inclusion. We're in a university setting, so what would you be your advice for the students and staff in the universities and professors here in terms of to create kind of the next talent pool that is innovative and open and thinking about the purpose and aligning with the purpose and be willing to kind of raise their hand and be part of the conversation. So is there a particular message that you can share with the audience?
Sure, I can give it a crack. If I look at the projects that we have, I'm sure that in other companies, where we're going in the challenge that we have to solve, they're going to be extremely cross-functional. When I grew up you know, as an organometallic chemist, a lot of those projects where, you know, a single person can do a lot of stuff themselves. Almost all these projects are very cross-functional. So my advice, especially to the students in the room, is first of all, get very good at something. So just dig in, have passion, you know, really dig in and enjoy it. I think that's a number one. But be aware that what exactly you do that may not be what you do in the next project and the project after. You have to translate that. You have to you know, lift and shift that into other areas at some point. And I think, so that's one. Number two is, because it's becoming so much more cross-functional, communication skills are absolutely critical. I'm telling myself I'm a lifelong student of communication. I always feel like, how can I do better? How can I connect? You grow up in a vernacular in whatever your main major is, and in my case it was inorganic chemistry, and you're going to have to talk to very different people. And how do you make that communication happen, right? And it becomes even more important when we, you know, as you rise up the ladder, you know, how you communicate to senior management. Senior management is like, it's like the arc of life, right? You have like the attention span of a 4-year-old. So you have to come to the point very quickly, and then you can do, or how you connect to other scientists there. You have to be adaptable in terms of your communication. And then the third one is these kind of collaboration, teaming, EQ skills. Train them. You can train them in totally different arenas, not necessarily in what you do, but how you work together, how you interact with others. I think those kind of things will be much more important. We will hire a lot less for specific experience going forward. We're going to hire for brilliance, communication, and collaboration skills.
I would just add the only thing, I think it's brilliant what you said, and totally aligned. The one thing that we're also thinking about is, I think you guys were calling it the innovation mindset, we call it the growth mindset, and so that's the other dimension that we're thinking about when we're talking and interviewing people, is just, do you have a kind of a passion for learning, a passion for figuring out what's next, okay with letting things that didn't work, kind of learning from them and moving on, and so we are much more looking for that kind of improving, getting better kind of mindset, and less of proving it. So if we looked at our company in the past, it was kind of proving it and getting it right was what was the currency of kind of how you went up the ladder. I would say it is not the currency of today. Today we're looking for people who are looking at improving and getting better. And that is really for whether that's for themselves individually, personally in their personal development, or whether that is on their projects or the team that they're working with or how they're communicating. All of that is tied to how are they thinking about improving and getting better and celebrating where it didn't work. We are celebrating purposeful experimentation, purposeful kind of failure is actually really being celebrated. So I'd say that coming with that mindset and connecting to purpose and a diverse team is part of the combination that we're seeing as successful.
Yep.
Great. So we heard about the importance of learning and knowing the focus really well, and now we take it to the level of you have to develop EQ, communicating really well, which we also discussed with the other panels, and failing fast and it's fail with purpose. So that's really key. So it's there's a lot of things happening and changing really fast, coming to us. I'm looking at my 12 years old, right? And in the midst of this, we call it, people call it this large social experiment in terms of technology, how we communicate. Now it's 270 characters and Twitters, and how we connect now, sitting on the table, everybody's looking at their cell phone and communicating. So how do you, or the question will be, what, as a leader, as leaders in the industry, preparation in terms of how this new generation is going to change how we communicate, and concern on the unintended consequences of the technology that they grew up with. So how do we wrestle with that?
Well, I guess I'd like to start first with just talking a little bit about embracing that digital kind of world and what do we think about that, because I'd say we're actually excited about it from the perspective that it's an opportunity to connect with consumers. We're trying to stay relevant and continue to connect with consumers, and if that's their method of communication that they prefer, we're excited to figure out how to better kind of connect in that way. And so we recently converted our box tops for education program. Maybe you're familiar with it, but it's where you clip the little box tops off and send them, you have someone who collates them, sends them to kind of a central school. And over the last, I think it started like in '76 when we kind of started this program, so a long time ago, but we've given nearly $1 billion worth of dollars back into the school systems. And we, for years, had people cutting out box tops. Well, just a couple months ago, we converted that to digital. And we weren't sure how it was going to go. Were people enjoying cutting them, and part of the ritual of getting things together, was that going to be difficult? The reality was, within 14 weeks, we had 1 million people who had converted over, were taking pictures of their box tops, and we had 4 million receipts. And with that, not only were we able to get the money to them more quickly, we are also able to learn what are their preferences more. And as we get that, we can personalize more what they're interested in. So if they're buying fruit snacks and they're more interested in fruit snacks, they're now getting more feedback on their communication vehicles to get something that's more matched and tailored to them. So I would say, first of all, we are embracing some of the digital feedback loop and celebrating the fact that it's helping us kind of with consumers. And then as it relates to how we're doing ITQ, how we're doing R&D, we're using it as well. We are excited about students who are learning data science, statistics, figuring out how to visualize data. All of that is helping us to get smarter, faster, and to be competitive. And so I would say it's a healthy part of how we can make more data-based decision-making and do a better job. And so, so that's the side of kind of how are we embracing it. Maybe I'll turn it over to Florian to see how they're embracing it. But then I liked your question to talk about what are maybe some of the unintended consequences. And so maybe if you don't capture that, we can circle back. But I'd love to hear first, what are you doing on the digital side of things?
I think that's clearly something you have to go with the times, right? Otherwise, you would still have 8-track players or whatever. So you have to go along with the future, and it's kind of how we do stuff at home, right? I mean, I'm most likely somewhere and buy something over, from my mobile phone. So we got to get with the program, and I think that's very, very important. I do, that's a message to the students. Do watch your digital footprint. If it's out there, somebody will find it at some point. So I think that's always it's always a good, it's always a good message to think once before it's posted. And I'm telling my daughter all the time. But in general, this is the way we do things, and it's actually a very powerful way to interact. Some of those, those can be very effective way to collaborate. Myself, I have to. I'm still slow with tweeting. I'm more, but I do put out some stuff over LinkedIn, and there's different formats, right? And so we're embracing it. We still have some room for improvement, but it is the way to go.
Yeah, I was just going to say, kind of to the point of. What might be the unintended consequence of kind of as we, use more automation, we use artificial intelligence, we use ways to automate things. We've thought about that a little bit to kind of figure out, one, we have to be mindful whether it's security policies or kind of what are the next steps out to the decisions we're making. So we're definitely being very mindful about that. But the other thing that I would say is that we've come to recognize that there's some things that computers and the digital side of the house do expertly well. When it's historic, repeated patterns, perfect for that. When it comes to things that are about how to shape a great question, how to look at a business problem in a new way, that is what people uniquely do, and there's no way that computers are going to outsmart us on that, or not for quite some time. You hear people talk about kind of narrow and broad artificial intelligence, and I think right now we're in the narrow stage. Maybe someday it'll be broad, but right now that feels like it won't take this human element of, can you shape a good question? Can you shape a good problem? Because then you can use the automation to actually get you the data to help you with your hypothesis. But we really still need people to have hypotheses. And even if you have computers who can come up with 3 hypotheses, you still need somebody to actually connect the dots and make the decisions. So I'm feeling really good that there's a role for both, that they're complementary, and there's some things that humans do really well, and there's some things that computers do really well. And it's about, kind of as Florian said, recognizing that and using both.
Yeah.
It's also really cool to see the savviness, right? I feel like the generation of my daughter and she's 18 years old now in college. They find stuff just so much better than myself, right? So the knowledge doesn't have to be always there, but they have access. So I think, and that brings it back to diverse teams, right? So how do you bring these different generations together? Because they all play. If everybody plays to their strength, hard to beat.
Excellent. So I'm going to shift gears here, discussion more on personal. So would you be able to share with the audience here your personal story? You have a tremendous experience and career to where you are right now. Can you share a little bit of how do you get there, and if you can share a word of wisdom in terms of for the aspiring entrepreneurs and students who one day want to be the chief technology officer who is responsible for the innovation of a company?
Well, so just to put things into perspective, so I grew up in the late 60s, 70s, early 80s in the 80s in Germany. And during that time, the plan was very clear. So especially as a chemist, you do your undergrad and your PhD in the same city, typically in the city you grew up with. Then you go to a chemical company on the Rhine River, then you work there for 30 years, and then you retire, and then you die. Really not that complicated, very linear process. And when I look at my pathway now, it's like a sinusoidal curve in terms of the size of the companies all over industries, all over the map. And I think that's kind of the message. Opportunities come when they come. And so it's more about skill building, more about learning, rather than thinking like, okay, I'm in this organization now and I want to go from this job to this job to this job. Chances are, especially in the world we live in, that by the time you think you're going to be at that job may not even exist anymore, or it might be somewhere else or so. So I think you have to be really, it has to be about the moment, it has to be about the process, it has to be about, this is cool, I want to do this. And so it's about skill building, and it's about actually enjoying the moment. And it's a little bit around like if you have a target, like you want to lose weight or something like this. You enjoy the working out along the time, and then good things will happen later on. So in my case, it was, hey, a professor went from a German from the university in Munich that I was at to the U.S. I followed along. Then he left, so I transferred into MIT. From there, this sounded super exciting in the B2C market. Then I got this, GE was the hottest company at the time. But these things happen. The startup. If you think about the startup company, it went from I had responsibility for like 100 and some people in GE and in the private equity company that bought us. And then I went to like leading 5 people. But it's not about the number, it's not about the budget, it's about the experiences, what you learn. And I learned so much in that startup that actually has helped me later on. And so what I'm telling you, the jobs that you might get at some point might be jobs that maybe don't even exist today, who knows. The key is if you in your gut feel this is a great new skill, this is a great opportunity, I think I'm going to be really passionate around it. Passion is an incredible career accelerator, and you're passionate around it, go for it. And you'll find and great things will happen.
So while we had very different starting places, I'm Minneapolis, Minnesota, we probably had a lot of similarity in terms of our thinking about kind of career paths. So grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, one of 5 girls, so a very, very fortunate dad who has 5 daughters, no sons, but did a lot of coaching of flag football and broomball and all sorts of things in spite of the fact that he had 5 girls. But he's an engineer. And so I think one of the ways that you get attention when you're one of 5 is you like the same things as your dad. So I went to school for engineering. My dad was an engineer. I went for engineering. It was time that he and I spent together. Calculus, that was like kind of our secret language, was doing the calculus homework together. And so I went to engineering school, and then got into, I started out at Kraft in Chicago, and I had a background in chemical engineering and polymer science, and did packaging to start out with. And what I quickly realized was that I didn't really care as much about what I was working on as just the kind of chance to learn and make a difference. So I am just a learner at heart, and so while some people have a real clear passion, like they want to become a chemical guy who's going to work at a chemical company and they know that chemistry is their thing, maybe for me I was less in that path, and it sounds like you were less in that path. Exactly. You were more in the path of, what could be the next learning adventure. And I looked at learning not only about the subject itself, but also about the leader. I was very purposeful about who might I learn from next. And it wasn't always the leader who I liked most. That I looked much more at where will I get the biggest gap in the learning possibility. So it could be a gap where it was something that was really uncomfortable and different than how I might lead. So I wanted to go learn and either hone my skill in that or cement that I really did not want to lead that way. So it could have been either way, but I valued those learning experiences as much as those where it was somebody who I really aspired to be like. And so I usually at each kind of turn or kind of juncture thought about what would maximize kind of my learning on the content and what would maximize my learning on the team or the leader that I might work with. And so those were the things that then I just kind of twisted and turned, just like Florian said. I never had a master plan. I did some marketing along the way. I did a lot of technical things. I've lived in a lot of different places, and usually it was from kind of saying yes and. So rather than saying no or I'm not sure, I usually said yes and then figured it out.
I think that this lifelong learning has now come up multiple times, right? In you know, think about it. As an organometallic chemist now, learning about all these like plant science and in food science and in biotechnology, is super exciting. But that is the key, and we heard it now multiple times. I think this constantly open to new stuff. That's it.
Excellent. So I think I want to continue that discussion with your diverse experiences from your chemical GE and then your background as well as in chemical engineers and in the packaging side also. So going back to kind of the topic, the big topic about building innovation mindset, have you seen the best practices coming from different industries that we can apply it in where we are right now in the agriculture kind of supply chain here that you can share with us?
I mean, we touched upon a few of those things already a little bit. I think, the automotive industry has done a really good job in terms of connecting across the ecosystem, right? If you think back to in the beginning times and at the heydays of the General Motors and Ford and Volkswagen, BMW and so on, from really the early on, from sometimes even from the steel plant all the way to the final vehicle, it was all under one roof and so on, and it's now 3, 4, 5 tiers that all kind of work together. If you create a challenging, if you work across a challenging new opportunity, it'll be like 3, 4 companies working together because they have to, because the skills, the capabilities, and the background sits in different companies along that tier structure. And I think you just have to get to a point where intellectual properties, all these kind of things, you have to sort them out up front. You find some clever arrangement, and then you put diverse teams from different players together into a room. And I think the key is to bring these different companies' skills, capabilities together. Take as much of the bureaucratic burden off, the way I always said, like, close the lab, slip a pizza underneath and let them figure it out. Really just sort of to really get the focus going. I think we touched upon this early on. I think this will happen here more and more too, that we will just align around things like that.
Can I follow up with that? So how do you allow that co-creation, that connectivity that you mentioned, and how do you resolve with the IP ownership? Because I think every time we're trying to innovate something, there's always the discussion that it ended up in the legal office, right? So, and it takes forever to get it
keep
done.
the lawyers out.
Exactly. So what have been your experiences? How do we resolve that? Because I think that's the key for us to actually collaborate and work together to solve our grand challenges of what we're facing here with agriculture, in terms of climate changes, population growth. How do we resolve that? What is your experience and success story?
Well, one thing, Florian and I actually talked about this yesterday because we were meeting in Minneapolis, so I'll tell you kind of one of our conversations, and that is that I think much more about field of use than I do about ownership of the actual invention. And so when you think that way, it becomes less important during the early collaboration stages to understand, whose idea was it? Was it Florian's? Was it Jodi's? Well, and trying to kind of debate that. Instead, I think much more about what field of use will you use? Well, you're going to use it with the growers, you're going to use it with your ingredients, and my field of use is going to be the finished products. That's where we're going to actually monetize and drive value out of that innovation. Now we can work completely unfettered, collaborate like crazy, because I know that anything that we generate, regardless of whether it was his idea or my idea, if it's something related to the upstream agricultural side of things, that's going to be Florian's. If it's something that's related to a finished product attribute or something in the finished product, that's going to be mine. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing is just this evolution towards thinking more about the output than about the inventorship as an opportunity to allow collaboration to flow more freely. So that's one thing I've seen as a transition over the last 5 years. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and we did this even in the automotive industry when when there's no competitive overlap, when you really can define it, I think that works terrific. The other part that we see, and it comes with what we discussed before, the real competitive advantage is becoming more and more speed. In our intellectual, the classic patent and IP process is not even keeping up. So if you do a fundamental retooling of the DNA and you create all kinds of new fundamental technologies with like a 10, 15, 20 year horizon, the classic IP process will be absolutely critical. But a lot of these food solutions that we're now discussing, by the time the patent issues, we're already off to the next thing, right? So it doesn't even become that critical anymore. The competitive advantage is not the intellectual property anymore. The intellectual, the true competitive advantage in many areas will be the speed.
And recognizing the difference of when it's that. I mean, we literally talk about what are our big bets, what are the ones where it's the underlying foundation, the building blocks, where we would say the intellectual property and figuring that piece out is value added, versus this is something where the half-life of it, of time on shelf or time that people are going to be buying it is so small that it's more important to be first and fast. Yep. So I think Florian is a great capture of that.
And I think we talked a little bit about how we're going to innovate, and so for us, it's more about building the fundamental background IP on some fundamental, let's say, new ingredient technology. Right. Then that quick leveraging that fundamental IP or that fundamental technology into quick applications. The speed in the overall life cycle of that application won't even warrant formal IP.
Right. So. We talk about speed and how you're saying that it's really important actually to, in terms of how to win in the market. So for the front end, so this is, as you mentioned and you recognize as well, in terms of when we're talking in agriculture, a lot of, I think some of our probably players or attendees here are coming from kind of the seed technology and breeding program, kind of the gene editing and things like that. I think it has been kind of the challenges has been the request or the ask for increased diversity in our crop and biodiversity and improving the soil, reducing the disease pressures. That's becoming more and more important for the agriculture system to increase the biodiversity. So is there a way to allow that research in the small crops, not the corn, not the wheat, not the soybean, but which to accelerate in terms of their development, in terms of how we can grow fonio, I'm just making this up. Fonio is in crops in Africa, or even just looking at the native crops here that can increase the biodiversity, or intercropping, as you mentioned, as that. How we can encourage and nurture that kind of innovation while it's usually costs a lot of money and investment for long 5-10 years. On the meantime, the return of investment is not as big, or then there is the need also to have consumers and manufacturers to adopt that crops?
Yeah, so I think both of us play a little bit further, downstream of the value chain here. I would say if for the foreseeable future the return is negative, it's very difficult to convince a lot of people to put a lot of money into it. So that is always going to be a little bit of a problem. Now, can you in some cases, as you, and that's more wishful, forward-looking thinking, as you engage artificial intelligence and some of those things, if you can infer, if you understand, if over time, some gene manipulations or things like this better, is there a chance to then translate others' technologies more effectively? Could be, too early to tell, but I don't know if you have a good viewpoint on this, but it is always a balancing act and I think the consumer has a lot of say in this, as consumer demand for crops like this really go up, it will follow. And I think hopefully some of the tools, how do you use let's say research tool like inside ag to maybe accelerate things, as you can get demand and match that with accelerated way to do research, I think it will happen. But I think it has to always be tied into some sort of form of demand.
So one thing that I think might be exciting for kind of maybe connecting two disconnected parts that maybe wouldn't be obvious is that as consumers have, and speed has picked up in terms of the number of iterations that we're doing, the size of the things that we're launching has gotten smaller. So I think that being able to find a new crop or something that's unique and novel that in the past, because if you didn't have scale, no one had interest, today I would say we have the kind of the route to market developed for smaller things. So in the past, we wouldn't have had a way to do that. Today, I would say we are finding more and more that if there are consumers who have interest, even if it's a smaller set of consumers, it might be a deep passion for them. And so we're interested in those businesses. And so I think that allows us to pair those unique opportunities with smaller consumer sets, because we can now identify them. We can figure out that tribe. Who are those people who want that? So a couple examples. Maybe you saw Kernza, which is a grain with, perennial wheat with a kind of deep root system that we're really interested in as it relates to kind of how to help create a healthier ecosystem. It doesn't have a great supply chain figured out. How to grow it, how to actually mill it and bring it to market is challenging, but we did it anyways. We created enough cereal boxes to be able to get some sense of, are there consumers in that tribe who'd be interested in that particular area? So that's just one example. Another example is we identified an oat strain that was in Morocco that was high protein. And it needed to be domesticated to be able to grow it. And so we did that. We have a porridge business in Australia that is just the right size. If we were trying to do high protein oats for Cheerios here in the US, that's just such a huge market. It'd be very difficult to scale it quickly. But instead what we decided to do was test it out in a right-sized market where they really care about oats. And so we took an ancient grain, an ancient form of high protein oats. We are growing it in Australia for that smaller market. As it grows and does well, we'll then be able to expand it. So I think that there's opportunities today that if we looked in the past when it was only kind of mass or no opportunity, today I'd say we're looking for some of those kind of smaller defined focused areas and partnering up with people who have great next generation solutions that then we could kind of grow together.
Great, thank you, Jodi. So we talk a lot about innovation, the process, the people. So I would like to kind of shift our discussion more on the how do we measure our success, right? How do we measure innovation? In the past, we look at the amount, the gross sales, right? And then we'll always look at consumer testing and testing it for general population, the largest volume you can get. And as you mentioned, there's the speed of innovation, and there's a small niche of market that that actually grows that can refresh that awareness, brand awareness to the consumers. And so how do you change your metrics in terms of what all the changes that is going on around innovation?
So I measure in two things I think about. I think about core growth and I think about new growth. And core growth is about making the things that are big, bigger. And so we are looking at how are we doing on innovating and developing ideas on those big bases, because we have hero products like Old El Paso and Haagen-Dazs that people love. And we are looking at what innovations can we bring to make it relevant and contemporary for those consumers today. So we're measuring that. And the other side, though, that I think is the twist is this new side. We're not only looking at how do we make big things bigger, we're looking at how do we make new things bigger. And on that side, we are looking at how can we get into what we're calling growthier spaces. So we're looking at where are consumers going. If they're going to creating more of an experience than just a food product, then, and it's more of a delivery system, or it's a very unique, novel way of having food kind of intersect, whether it's, so maybe it's the how we bring the food to consumers. And that might be a new to big opportunity. And so I would say we're separating those out, where we have ambitions on both of them, and we're capturing how are we doing on our core growth, but then also how are we doing on the new growth, creating experiences and creating offerings that don't fit into our portfolio today. So they look very divergent and different, but they're opportunities of where consumers are going next.
Yeah, that's it's a little different for us as we are sort of in the middle of the supply chain, right? We look at it from different angle, because there's no one metric for us that really defines us. We always have, the way I like to view it, we gotta have a handle on the future, the present, and the past. With the future, I mean sort of what is the value of the innovation portfolio and so on. So we look at NPV and those kind of things to look forward. We look at the present is sort of how fast are we moving through stage gates, milestone, how many milestones are we making and so on. And then we look a little bit at the past. So what are the sales of ingredients or solutions that we have launched recently? And I think the most important part around this is, why are you having these metrics? You're not going to report them outside. The key is for us is to make decisions better, and I think and we can't lose sight of it. And the other part that's very important, because sometimes you have to kind of defend your existence, is how much of this innovative work is actually just to stay in business. It's very obvious in other companies, right? So if you take a iPhone 10 right now and it looks super fancy and so on, there is an automatic total cannibalism all the time, right? Everybody gets that. 5 years from now, it's going to look like a BlackBerry. 10 years ago, in 10 years, it looks even more outdated. So the bottom line, hopefully nobody has a BlackBerry. So the bottom line is there's a high, defensive component to it, and that doesn't always get appreciated. But the key is to get the metrics to are meaningful, and it's a set of metrics that help you make better decisions. We can't lose sight of that.
Thank you. So almost closing time here, almost out of time. So we discussed a lot of different topics around innovation. I want to give the two of you a chance to have any last word or your comments about innovation that we haven't touched on.
Yeah, I guess the last thing that I would just talk about that we didn't talk too much about, but I think is vitally important, is that we need to start out with solving big human problems. A lot of times we start talking about the solution. We start talking about what we're going to do, what we want to work on, what kind of solution idea that we have. And we are working hard to fall in love with the problem, because I think what happens with speed is you get speed by really understanding, having empathy and understanding the problem. And so I'll give you a quick example. We started really falling in love with people who are managing weight. It's a huge problem. We know that over 60% of people self-report that they're on a diet of some way, shape, or form. And we started not just listening to them saying that, but we actually started watching what they were doing. Remember what I said earlier, it was kind of do rather than say. So we started really looking at what they were doing, because they were telling us that they weren't dieting. So they were saying, I'm not dieting the way I used to diet, I'm just watching what I eat. And so we started really looking at what they were doing, and what we quickly realized is that a lot of the products that we were selling in the past no longer fit the diet principles of how they were actually living their lives, what they were actually eating. And so a great example on that is we changed our Fiber One formulation, the Fiber One bar. It had been a big weight management solution 5-10 years ago, and then was slowly declining. Well, right now it is on an all-time high growth rate. It's doing fantastic. And what we did is we changed the dieting principles to match with what consumers are really doing. And that is that they are going with low net carbs, higher protein. And as we changed that, it really started fitting consumers' needs. And so it all started with really empathizing and understanding the problem. The problem of weight management, the problem of how people are really living their lives. If we understand that, from the time that we understood to the time we got it in market was very quick, with a great tasting bar that is doing fantastic. But you have to start with really understanding a problem that's big enough to solve, and then picking up your speed from there.
I think innovation, and that has fascinated me my entire life, is this ability in some sort of way to create the future. In some way, innovation is creating the future because you get the new technologies in there. It all starts with the big challenges. And when I look at some of the examples that we're working on, similar to sort of how do you go to alternative sweetness, natural sweetness, how do you now use fermentation? We just launched our EverSweet product line where we use fermentation to get to natural components of stevia in a well-defined process that gives you a much better flavor profile, and now you have a zero-calorie natural kind of sweetener. A really cool example that's basically been driven a lot out of the Fort Collins site, and maybe the one I'm ending with is Latitude, where we take canola oil and we use canola oil to tinker with the DNA to make more omega-3s. If you look at the entire fish industry, in the aqua industry is a really desirable and growing form of protein. But if you farm it you have low omega-3 oils in there. And so if you now take some of that canola oil, bring it into our fish food business, now you can actually get omega-3 oils that are healthy for you back integrated into the supply chain, and you do not, because 90% of the oceans are overfished. So now you can actually solve a problem and also do it in such a way that actually increases the health profile. Those kind of things really get me up in the morning, and I think that's what innovation is all about.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to give it to Mercedes. You have some questions. Anybody who has questions, please raise your hand. And okay.
Forgot to turn it on. All right.
Sure.
Crazy how that works. I do actually have a question, a personal question. As a student that's graduating in May, what advice would you give to me as I navigate that transition from college life to a work life when I don't have a whole lot of responsibilities from 5 to midnight, when I don't have homework, I don't know what to do between 5 to midnight after I graduate? And then also, how do you navigate a transition in your career, either within the same company, since you've been 29 years, correct? Yeah. So how do you navigate that transition within the same company, or if you were with a different company and you transition to a different throughout your career?
So what a fun question, and a fun problem to have. That sounds like a great opportunity just to make that transition. And so what I would say is the number one thing I think about is thinking about what you're curious about. What are you curious about, and how could you get engaged? One of the things that I talk to people about when they're coming into our organization is to, one, make sure that there's something they're passionate and they're curious about every day, and that they've met somebody new. And I am an introvert at heart, so that is not always easy. So I always say, if you're an introvert, sometimes you have to be purposeful. So I have to, kind of identify who will I sit next to at lunch, who will I figure out kind of that I know somebody that they know that can introduce us. So I think the two things I always think about is, are you passionate and curious about something that you could go and learn more about? And then are you meeting somebody not just internal to the company or internal to the academic organization, but externally as well, to create a network? And even if that means being deliberate, sometimes that's the way that can work.
I totally agree. So, that passion and digging in, it's what got you there in the first. You just have to do it one more, and many more times in life. But I would like to build on this network comment, because sometimes people's like, why do you need a big network? most of life's problems, most of your projects going forward, none of the, if I look back, not much did I ever accomplish by myself. I always needed somebody's help. And so if you have a network, you actually know whom to call. And that's really actually a big plus right there. So I think this networking thing is an important part. If it's 50% of your time, you're probably not going to do very well in your day job. But if it's zero, you also cannot be effective in your day job.
Thank you. All right, so it is likely at some point the economy will recede. What happens to innovation and investment in innovation in a recession?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a downer. Hey, no, it's a great question, and I think it's going to be the challenge for our industry is to stick to it. I mean, you're always going to look for efficiency and so on, but you stick through it even through the tough times, because I don't think the way these problems are not going away, the challenges are not going away. How we address them, will require some resources. So will we look for efficiencies? Will we always do some things a little differently, for sure? But innovation, I don't think is that optional in our industry anymore, and I think that's the key message.
And the thing I would say about that is I just don't think it's evenly dispersed or set up the way it used to be. So I think if you were saying kind of for my company, is it going to be exactly the same in a recession? Maybe not. I don't care. We'll just work differently. So to me, innovation will stay. It's how we will do it that will change. And so I am committed that it's a consistent kind of thing. I don't think you can kind of turn it on and turn it off. So I think that it's more a mindset of we're going to innovate regardless, and we'll just do it differently. And so, and I feel that our strength and our adaptability is a core competency today, that adaptability is as important as aptitude in other kind of subject matters or other capabilities. And so we will just adapt to what's the next best way to get the innovation done, how will we put that network together and kind of go to the next level.
Thank you. So this is for you, Jodi. So regenerative ag sounds like returning to how we did work 100 years ago. How does General Mills define regenerative agriculture, and how do you verify those practices? How is it innovative, et cetera?
So the way that we've been talking about regenerative ag is that you're probably familiar with the kind of practices of low-till, cover crops, biodiversity, and those kind of things. But the way we're actually talking about it and kind of measuring it is more on the outcomes. So the outcomes that we're measuring are economic resilience, biodiversity, and soil health. So we are out there in the fields taking, core samples a meter down, and we are looking at how much carbon we sequestered and what is the quality of the soil. We are looking at the biodiversity. We're looking at the microorganisms in the soil samples. We're looking at water retention. We know that with climate change, we can expect to see more big rains, and farmers desperately need that moisture to go into the soil, and so healthy soils create a better environment for that. And so we are looking at it from a total ecosystem, and one of the groups that we have in our organization, we have agronomists, soil scientists, and their full-time job is to go out there and develop the science along with academia and many others, because as Florian said, we're not doing it alone. We are trying to get a network to go out there and take some of, like you said, I think those practices from the past that had served us well then, look at what's the next reinvention of those, how do we combine them with today's technology? I mean, because a lot of those practices of the past weren't coupled with great data science. So the ability to make decisions was difficult because it's much more of an art and a knowledge that you need to be able to make those decisions. And so having the data so that you can actually make a right decision at the right time was something that in the past we maybe had the practice, but we didn't have the data to know when and how to do it. So I think it's that combination of measuring, validating the science, using that to go out and talk to growers, and using the data to revalidate or to validate that we're progressing in the right way. But I'd have to say, we're on a learning journey. We do not have it figured out. We are in the early days. We believe it's the right direction to go, but we're going to pivot as we go, as we learn along with you.
Perfect. So another question we have here, success among food entrepreneurs generally means national scale. Do you foresee a future where regional sales are an accepted end goal?
For me, absolutely.
Oh, for
And
sure.
even smaller than that. I don't even know that it will always just be regional. We will talk about we're partnering with customers, we're partnering with, whether it's online or particular retailers, we're looking at regions, we're looking at national scale. I think we are open for business on all of those different types of ways of innovating.
And us working together with the brand owners like General Mills, a lot of our application centers are actually regional to make sure that we account for the different tastes in the region and so on. Absolutely.
One of the things that we always think about or talk about too is that science is global, but application is local. Tastes are local, and so we think about what's that underlying chassis. So the science and the underlying knowledge, building blocks, that's where we might make a deeper, longer term investment. But then that application on top, kind of customizing it at the last mile or kind of the late stage customization, is how we can make it economically viable, but still leverage the great science that all of us would love to work on.
And that's how you create speed too.
Exactly.
Here's another one for you, Jodi. I've been following Annie's experiment with marketing soil health. I heard that it has required a major rethinking of supply chains. What has this looked like? Has General Mills made investments in partner businesses? What are the lessons learned or opportunities?
So we own Annie's. We're the second largest organic food provider in the United States. And yes, we have made big inroads. So we've kind of talked a little bit about regenerative ag. So that's the first thing. Kernza actually came out through kind of our Annie's team. And I would say it is causing us to be very creative and to think, to the last conversation, a little bit about kind of having the right size and scale for the task at hand. So rather than thinking about kind of our historic macro systems and macro value chains, the way we did it in the past, we're thinking much more about what's the right size and the network that's kind of designed for that specific application. And so we have changed who we're partnering with to figure out kind of what size do we need now. It doesn't mean that that will be the way it is for all time, because obviously what we're hoping is that we're going to be successful in marketing that, and that consumers will value the planet. That, we kind of think about planet health and human health. They'll value both of those, and then over time that will grow, and then it will grow into some of the supply chain and value chain levers that we've had in the past. And so I would say it's about being ambidextrous. It's about being able to live in that small world and connect the small network, as well as grow it into that big kind of macro scale. So doing a bit of both.
Perfect. So this is the last call for questions before we move on. So we have, this person said, thank you. Great discussion. What are strategies that have been effective in managing resistance with leaders who are slower to change or adapt to the new workplace?
I'm gonna let you take that.
So it's like running a sports franchise. At some point, there's maybe not enough. If somebody is not going with the program over time, it's probably another company is maybe a better place. So you have to do some changes over time, if that's the case. But I always feel like if you create the right culture, actually, in most cases, you can bring people along, and again, if you're aligned around the purpose, I think I've seen really people make fundamental switches and really driving into a new direction. Take some time, but also I think it is important to make some clear marks. If you wanted to go into a different direction, and you would have to appoint some people that show that kind of culture, that kind of mindset, and it will help to get the organization along. So I'm in a new place, in a new company now, and when I look at the last 4 years in my Dow time, I integrated 1,200 R&D people from Dow Corning into the company, and then I moved about 1,500 over or 1,400 over into DuPont. So I have a fair amount of experience in moving stuff around and creating new cultures. There will always be the 70-80% that get it at different levels, and then there's a few people where you have to make it's just some clear choices, and I think that shows everyone where we're going to go, and that is ultimately part of it.
So my quick answer, somebody said this to me once, and I thought, there's change management and change management. So it's both. So I think there is a little bit of both to Florian's answer. Sometimes it is that it's not the right fit for everybody, and I think that that's okay. That's one of the benefits I think that millennials and different kind of industries have taught us, is that if it's not the right fit, if it's not the right size, make a change. And that's okay. There are so many people in the tech industry who are figuring out what's their next right thing, and it might not be, 29 years in a company like I have today, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't been a very successful career. So a lot of more fluidity about kind of how people are managing their careers and how companies are managing their workforce. So I think in the past, change management would have been kind of a dirty word. Today, I'd say, that can be an okay approach for both sides of the house. And then the other part is change management, which is more about the culture and the people and kind of what are the tools and on-ramps that we give people to help them to learn what that next generation, either of skill building that they need or of just kind of mindset shift that they need. And I have found that for the most part, people are excited. They want to be part of winning. They want to be part of making a difference. And if they need to, if you can show them what that next spot looks like, they are more than happy to let go of the old way and figure out how to jump into that next place. And so, so I'd say it's both types of change management, but I'm finding that it's creating an inspiring place to work.
Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Jodi. I'm going to toss it back to you, Angela.
Okay, thank you, Mercedes. So I want to thank you, Florian and Jodi, for being here. And I think I totally agree, change is constant. So whether we like it or not, the reality is it's here, and we cannot really run away from it. It's the same thing with technology, right? It's here, so we cannot go back to typewriting. So,
Oh, good.
Embracing is the key, right?
Yes.
Having fun with it.
Right, exactly. So I think I want to thank you for both for answering and then creating a lovely discussion. Hopefully everybody's still awake. And I want to thank you everybody as well for submitting the questions, and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you, Angela.